So I'm really excited to welcome now Joel Makower, co-founder of Trellis Group, to the stage, who will be in conversation with Patita Nkamunu from EarthAcre and Aleksandra Holmlund from Qarlbo Biodiversity. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Teresa. While we're getting settled, can we have a round of appreciation for the two people who brought us together, a whole crew, but really two people who brought us together and made all this magic happen, Teresa Lieb and Alex Navarro. We have a very short time to talk about a very big topic, so let's get into it. Biodiversity credits. Patita, let's start with you. What's the elevator pitch for the biodiversity credits at EarthAcre?
We produce products that are directly ensuring benefits to communities with transparency and ensuring that we have proper reporting on the biodiversity uplift.
Okay, that's a great elevator pitch. We've only made it to a couple of floors. Let's have a longer ride. What are those products? How do they work?
When you're developing these nature assets, the one thing that we always have to have at the back of our minds is that these communities are actually the stewards of nature. They're the owners of these resources. But by and large, in countries in East Africa, these communities do not benefit from this nature. They co-host the nature, they co-manage the nature assets, wildlife and all that, but they do not benefit from it. The benefit goes to the government and to the investors. So these communities are beginning in their own way. The activities that they do are driving biodiversity loss. Reason being, they want to support their livelihoods. So unless and until these benefits go directly to them to serve their needs and to speak to the challenges that are causing them to destroy nature, this will continue to happen. So for EarthAcre, our primary and key aspect is to ensure that these benefits have to get to that person who is actually stewarding nature, taking care of that nature, and for them to actually know that their work is appreciated and they're recognized for it.
Great. Well, we'll come back to that. But Aleksandra, let's hear your pitch.
My pitch would be that biodiversity credits are a tool that corporations can use to engage in nature positive outcomes. They can connect corporate value chains, particular biodiversity areas that their businesses influence.
So let's talk about the corporate piece of this and how what each of you does plays into what companies need to be doing in terms of looking at their biodiversity footprint and how it enables them to reduce that or to offset that in a way, or however you describe it. You mentioned companies first, Aleksandra. Talk a little bit about how do you work with companies?
Well, it's early days, yes, I should say. But what we try to do is to understand, since we work in forestry-based projects at Shred, so anything that is made out of trees, that could be paper, diapers, wood in furniture, etc., in construction material, all these products have been growing as trees. So any business that uses those products or is selling them has a reason to think about forest biodiversity. And by assessing the corporate footprint connected to those products, the footprint can actually be translated into a hectare footprint and therefore translated into a positive biodiversity outcome in terms of a credit per hectare.
So my company makes widgets of some sort, and I have an impact in my supply chain and in my operations, perhaps the facilities. How do we measure it? How do you know how to offset that, or to what companies need to be able to do to make sure that they're contributing to their part of nature positive, nature restoration?
Well, the first thing would be to do the footprinting assessment. And there are experts who are better than me at both explaining and actually doing it. But really what it is about is understanding the amount really of damage that a production or a business is really creating on a particular ecosystem.
And what is the state of the art of those measurements? Is it something we can really accurately track at this point, or is it still little bit of a guesstimate?
I would say it's not perfect, but we certainly know relatively well what the footprints are. And we know how to describe them relatively well. And we actually don't need to be that exact to start acting now.
Patita, the businesses you're working with are small businesses, land smallholders, but also they are at the beginnings of larger supply chains. So how do you interact with them, and how does that roll up to some of the companies in this room, or how can it roll up to some of these companies?
In the process of developing these projects, there are various processes, and we end up with a product that we call a PDD, or as recommended by the Vera Nature Framework, which is the project design document. And in it, it has got details, for example, of land tenure system, who are the owners of these lands, who are the custodians of these resources, what is the governance structure like for those communities. And this is most cases to ensure that we are avoiding elite capture. And the other thing is the benefit sharing model. Different companies have different ways in which they do it, but for EarthAcre, the benefit sharing model is pretty equitable in the sense that we give 70% of the earnings to the landowners and the communities, because they have got to see this as a financially feasible option. And for them to not till their land, for them not to lease their land, for them not to use their land for mining, they've got to get an income that will allow them, that will make them choose not to destroy, not to convert their land to something that will be incompatible to conservation and to their land use as well. So I think, in summary, the PDD, which would be what an investor, what you would ask from this particular investor, would be that PDD where you get to see the details of the project, how it has been developed, what the process, and what are the social guardrails, the free, prior, and informed consent, who are the stakeholders involved in the project, how long has it been, what is the government's role in it, and all that is stipulated in the document that allows you to see how much the community has been included in decision making.
As we look at carbon credits, we see how complex and challenging that's been. Things like additionality and double counting and permanence and so on. And with biodiversity, we're not just talking about one thing, tons of carbon. We're talking about nature. So what are some of the verification and methods, or how do you make sure that what you're talking about actually happens, and happens not just for the short term, but over the longer term? Aleksandra, I'll start with you.
Sure. So actually, we do have a lot of knowledge about biodiversity credits, which sometimes are called credits, sometimes are called something else. There exists tons of scientific literature on the topic of payments for ecosystem services that has existed for a very long time. So we actually know what works and what doesn't. We have also a lot of lessons learned from what has not worked very well from carbon markets. And there are several organizations actually present here today that have provided good guidelines, such as guidelines from the Biodiversity Credit Alliance. There are several papers written on the integrity of biodiversity credits, for example. And that includes the usual things such as additionality, permanence, leakage, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Patita, how do you ensure that what you say is happening, and what the landowners say is happening actually happens over the long term?
Let me speak to what I would say sovereignty of data for these indigenous communities. At EarthAcre, we look at harnessing that indigenous knowledge with technology to ensure that that information is kept with the community and also with EarthAcre. I'd say that the point we are at is that this information does exist among communities. It's just that they do not record it in the way that we do. But with using their knowledge and information that they had over time and recording it, it means that as we develop this product, they can see their knowledge in it. They can see their story in it. And so that becomes that it is not only what we know and what we have found them doing, but rather product that shows a contribution of the community and what we also have managed to do using technology, being acoustics, remote sensing, and all that.
I imagine that doing this also enables you and all of us to capture and retain some of that indigenous knowledge while before some of it is, as we know, well, is disappearing. Is that part of what these credits involve?
Yes, it does, because the definition of their culture, their heritage, who they are, where they are now, and where they want to be, things are changing. And for them also, as generations come, because this knowledge of taking care of nature has been passed on to them over time, and things are changing, yes. And minus that knowledge and minus that practice that they do, those practices that they do, things will be different in future. And hoping that whatever is happening now within those communities is captured by them and those working with them like EarthAcre, so that it remains within their history, within their heritage, and within their story.
Aleksandra, for a company here that is interested but has not yet dipped their corporate toe in the water yet on biodiversity credits, what do you advise them to do? How do you start?
Well, the general recommendation would be to start with assessing the current status, and to work with a corporate biodiversity strategy. Another general recommendation would be applying the mitigation hierarchy as a precondition to any other ambitions towards nature positive.
Well, I guess part of my question is also who do you turn to? Obviously, your two organizations are likely candidates, but what a company, who do you call? What do you do? How do you start? What are the organizations that can help basically get them ready for the work that you do?
Well, we have been engaged at Qarlbo, both in the Biodiversity Credit Alliance and also in Sweden in a similar organization to create a practical application, really, of the global recommendations set by Biodiversity Credit Alliance and how that might work in practice. So today we have actually a standard for biodiversity credit, a global standard that is based in Sweden, and that provides this framework for how we can work with biodiversity credits. And we focus actually on production landscapes as our niche. Which is a direct connection to corporate value chains. It makes it much easier for corporations to relate to what they're affecting to what we're actually hoping to provide in terms of biodiversity credits.
Patita, tell us a short story of something that's going on the project that you've been involved with, involving a company that would help some of our audience, some of our viewers understand what this looks like in real life.
In some of these areas or regions that we work with, the form of livelihood is pastoralism or livestock keeping, with some areas also having some form of tourism. So there is a form of another layer of revenue, but there is the unexplored nature asset or unexplored other revenue flow, which would be biodiversity and carbon credits. In this particular case for today, we'll talk about biodiversity credits. So you're looking at working with a community or looking at your ESG report, what TNFD is requesting or asking you to do as a company, and you're thinking about what is it that I can do in my own way to ensure that I support some form of biodiversity uplift. What that would look like is that you would be getting a report from a certain region showing that if you were to purchase certain, say you're buying, say 100 credits, what will that look like? That will look like you're going to benefit, say, about 3 to 4 households, depending on how much land these community landowners own, or let's just say 50 households. And for these 50 households, what this is going to look like is that they're going to get direct cash transfers. This means that they're going to get money, just the same way you get a salary at the end of the month. And this means that it is going to sort their direct basic needs that they have as families. And with these direct needs, what are you going to be doing? We will be tracking the social economic impact of these families as they receive these funds. What do we do for the nature biodiversity uplift? You get a report of this certain area of how much species have been identified, have been observed over a period of time. What is the state like? And for example, also get a report of what would be the human-wildlife conflict or human-wildlife coexistence interaction reports look like, which go, of course, a long way with government reports as well. And the last one would be what we would call fence removal. In order to support biodiversity uplift, we've got to put down fences that are blocking wildlife movement or species movement. And so those reports is what then go into your buying of credit as a report that you get to show what has been the impact for both wildlife, for communities living in this particular landscape.
So down to the last minute or so. So when we meet back here at COP17, what's the story each of you hopes to be able to tell about biodiversity credits and how far we've progressed? Aleksandra, start with you.
Well, I believe that we will see more use cases for biodiversity credits, again, in connection with corporate value chains, and a more broader adoption of this way of thinking.
I hope to see more corporates directing financing to indigenous communities or communities with buying of nature credits, hoping that we will be able to give reports of stakeholders or families that will have received direct cash transfers transparently, and also see reports of the socioeconomic impact of what these funds have been able to do at community level.
Wow, lots to think about and exciting area to develop. And we wish we had more time to talk about more things, but we are out of time. We've got more great sessions to come. Thank you so much for the work that you do and for helping show the way and pioneering these biodiversity credits. Please join me in thanking Aleksandra and Patita.